Good evening. It is Friday, December 27th, 2019, and it's 6 p.m. in the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., and you're tuned to the Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And for the next hour, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. It's Friday, so that means it's panel time, and we're joined by a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, as always, welcome back.
I'm always glad to be here.
We're joined by author and former Washington Post bureau chief and award-winning foreign correspondent on two continents, John Jeter. John, welcome back to the Critical Hour.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
All right. So as nauseating as this conversation has become, because it is one of the biggest news generators, at least on this continent, I got to start with Trump's impeachment trial clouded by Schumer-McConnell feud. McConnell and Schumer on Monday, they're deadlocked on key questions surrounding this impeachment trial more than a week after Schumer has made his opening salvo. Is this American political kabuki theater, Caleb Maupin?
Indeed. The idea is to keep us talking about issues, keep us talking about personalities and a battle of personalities and a reality TV show on Capitol Hill. Very unexciting and very uninteresting to many, many Americans, but it's what the media is focusing on. It's what the political leaders are focusing on. And I think it's what we're going to be hearing about from the mainstream voices in U.S. politics and mainstream U.S. media for the next months. That's what it's going to be all about. The Trump reality show in the White House will be moving to Capitol Hill, and we'll hear about many personalities clashing with each other and many people not liking each other, and it'll be a soap opera that doesn't end.
John Jeter, your thoughts?
I don't have much to add to what Caleb said. This is theater. It's intended to distract us from the fact that revolution is happening all over the world. And so they are trying to add as much tension to something for which the stakes are so low that no one is very interested. So, yeah, this is just theater, a continuing effort to distract the American public from what really ails us.
When you look at Schumer's interests and you look at McConnell's interests and you look at Pelosi's interests, are these three individuals fighting over principle and substantive positions, or are they really just kind of in a ring shout with their hands around the fire doing what the culture is expecting them to do? Caleb, is that a reasonable question to ask?
At this point, it seems like this is a distraction,
okay.
and this is a way of keeping us out of things. And it is also, unfortunately, I think it fits into a wider problem we have in our culture, which is the way people have been trained to think about politics is in terms of personalities, right? That we haven't, taught our students in our schools how to examine issues with any real depth. I mean, you've seen the same studies I've seen where Americans can't seem to find their country on a map, right? I mean, National Geographic comes out with those numbers every year, right? They can't find the countries we're bombing on a map. They can't find the country they live in on a map. Our public is wildly, wildly disinformed. And oddly, other than a few mantras like this is the greatest country in the world, everyone knows that America is the greatest country in the world. They can't tell you the metric by which that was determined, compared to what country, based on what. They can't tell you, but everyone knows it's the greatest country in the world. And if you don't think that, then you're brainwashed, right? You're brainwashed. You must be brainwashed if you don't know that it's the greatest country in the world, even though we can't find it on a map. I mean, this is the sad reality of American political discourse. I hope it gets better.
And John, not only can we not find it on the map, if you put the top 10 political faces on a chart, kind of like the Soul Train music match, they wouldn't be able to pick out who these people are, who the major players are.
Well, they're not relevant to our lives, or at least not in any positive way, so why would we know them? I mean, I will go even a step further. Not only do I not think that Pelosi, Schumer, and McConnell are lacking in all principles, I will say that in my 30 years in journalism, I don't think I've ever met, maybe with the exception of the late Paul Wellstone, a U.S. senator who did have any legitimate principles. I don't think any of them have principles. I don't think that's why they're there. And so this is again, theater intended to keep us from thinking about what the yellow vests are doing in France or, what's happening in Latin America.
Okay, so let's move on from the distraction to another distraction. People should take him very seriously. Bernie Sanders' polling surge reportedly forcing Democratic establishment to admit he can win. This to me, and I want to be as unbiased in this as I can, but it just to me is incredibly illuminating in terms of how unfair and confused this whole process is. Bernie Sanders' recent surge in national and early state polls really are being, on the one hand, ignored by major media, but on the other hand, are really forcing Democratic leadership and elites to come to grips with something that they really don't want to come to grips with, and that Bernie isn't going anywhere. Caleb Maupin.
In 2016, I believed what mainstream media was telling us, which was that Hillary Clinton had it, in the bag. She was going to win. But people that I work with, people in the newsroom who follow the rallies very, very closely were saying to me, look at the rallies. The Hillary Clinton rallies are tiny. The Trump rallies are massive. They are massive. And anyone who looked at the rallies in 2016 and the that have been happening now have known that more than any other candidate, people pile in to see Bernie Sanders. People are far more excited about Bernie Sanders than Pete Buttigieg. People will drive miles and miles. 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds voting for the first time. There's a real huge amount of enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders, and among other Democrats, the enthusiasm really isn't there. And enthusiasm is a big measurement. It's not simply a matter of do people, like somebody, right? That just liking or disliking the other person, that doesn't get people to the polls. That energy is really, really important in a presidential campaign. And Sanders is really the only Democrat at this point that has that kind of energy. And they have been the opponents, the more mainstream figures in the Democratic Party have almost been rotating. For a while, they were really hoping that Kamala Harris would get that energy. Didn't work. Then they were really hoping Pete Buttigieg would have that energy. Didn't exactly work. Elizabeth Warren didn't have that energy. Sanders has the charisma because he's a populist, right? He's a social democrat and he's a populist. And he is talking in a language of fighting the elites, a language of building up a more healthy welfare state in the United States, providing services to people. And it's a language that's a little bit more honest than and a little bit more bold in addressing some of the issues that the country has. So Sanders has the enthusiasm in the bag, and enthusiasm gets people to the polls, and energy, and that's all that stuff is very, very important. People thought that there was no way Trump could be elected, but he had the energy and the enthusiasm, and he won. And I think that's one indicator that Sanders very well could win this.
John Jeter, we've been listening to Bernie Sanders for quite a while. One of the things about him, beyond what Caleb has said about enthusiasm and energy, consistency. Bernie has been saying the same things for a very, very long time. When you look at Elizabeth Warren and listen to Elizabeth Warren, where did she get a lot of her positioning from? From Bernie. When you listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's out of Bernie's camp. So are the other members of the squad. They're out of Bernie's camp. And the Democratic elite just do not want to move in that direction.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I have been on record as saying, I have gone on record as saying that only the DNC or an act of God can stop Bernie Sanders from being the next president. And I think everyone knows this. I think the Democratic establishment knows this, and they don't want, Bernie Sanders is essentially a New Dealer, and we have moved on from the New Deal. And much like they didn't want Jesse Jackson, much like Jesse Jackson was a threat back in 84 and especially 88, the Democratic establishment has joined with the media to do an anyone but Bernie campaign against him. And I don't think it's going to work. I think the only thing that the Democratic National Committee can do to stop his nomination is to rig it like they did for Hillary Clinton. And I think that will incite a civil war within the party. So I'm not sure that they can even do that. And to top it all off, if you really want to know who is the favorite to win the White House, listen to Donald Trump talk about Bernie Sanders. There's no insulting, Pocahontas or the way he talks about Joe Biden. He respects Bernie Sanders, which tells you what? He fears Bernie Sanders. And so, this is inevitable to me. And I think the only thing that can stop, the only thing that can derail the Bernie train is an act of God or an act of the DNC and Tom Perez.
Very well said, John Jeter. Caleb, to that point, when I think about John's point about who Trump is attacking and why, Bernie doesn't have the Joe Biden baggage, not nearly to the degree that Biden has. There's not going to be a Hunter Biden walking behind Bernie Sanders. He's much more consistent than Elizabeth Warren has been. And he has proven over time to be an incredible debater, and the guy knows how to stay on message. To all of that, that's what Donald Trump, I think, fears most.
Indeed. I mean, we can recall back in 2016, the Fox News network, which is, as we know, they have the top ratings of any cable news network in the United States, and that's because they are very, very advertising and market-driven. They want people watching, right? That's more than anything. And they knew that one primetime hit that they could get people to tune into would have been a Sanders-Trump debate. And they did it. And Fox begged Trump and Sanders to debate. And Sanders agreed to it, and the Trump people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They just were not going to do it. And Fox really wanted to have that debate. They were very excited because they knew the whole country would watch Sanders and Trump debate, but it didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a reason, and I think that's because the Trump people knew that Sanders on the same stage with Donald Trump could spell the end of Donald Trump's political career. And that also that Sanders has some of the appeal that Trump people look for. Again, Sanders is a populist. Sanders is against the system. He's calling out the millionaires and billionaires. And, Trump on stage with Hillary Clinton makes Trump look good in some ways. Hillary Clinton is almost a symbol of the slimy, political corruption that people in the USA are tired of. Whereas Trump on the same stage with Sanders, Sanders might look better to a lot of viewers. So, if this were to happen, this could be something that the Trump campaign is very, very nervous about. I would think so. I will add that, one thing that's worth mentioning is, Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that everything has already come out about him. I mean, every scandal. The guy's so old at this point. Like every possible. It's like, how many more skeletons could he have in his closet? They threw, Cuba at him, Nicaragua at him, communism, you name it. This, a story that he wrote in a college newspaper that people said was inappropriate. And they have dug up everything. There's nothing left to dig up. He's Bernie Sanders. He's been around in Vermont politics for decades, and it's going to be very, very hard to have some kind of October surprise, I think, at this point. They'll have to keep digging because the Clinton people have dug up so much.
And John, to Caleb's point, I said last week that, Bernie walked to high school with Moses. Bernie's been around a long time. Moses was 2 years ahead of Bernie in high school. And they used to walk to school together. Real quick, on this whole thing, John, you alluded to this about mainstream media. On Monday, CNN reportedly twice displayed a 6-week-old poll from Iowa showing Bernie in 4th place, where the current data shows that Bernie has a very, very, very strong second. There really seems to be, and there have been a number of instances where I have he's omitted from the conversation. They'll talk about Buttigieg, and Buttigieg is rising in the polls. He now has 9%, but they won't talk about Bernie.
Yeah, we talked about journalists of a certain age, like you and I, Doctor, and we both remember what they did to Jesse Jackson and how Jesse's campaign, which very much like Bernie's campaign, turned on a lot of people who otherwise would not be interested in electoral politics. And the Democratic Party, nor does the Republican Party want that, but the Democratic Party especially does not want that. They want an electorate that they can control and manipulate, and that they can continue to deliver the same crumbs while delivering the world to Wall Street and their donors. And so, Bernie's campaign is very much a threat to the Democratic establishment. They are pulling out all the stops, and of course, the media is in bed with the Democratic establishment. They see themselves as part of a tripartite alliance with the Democratic establishment, and so they're carrying water for them, and they're conspiring to black out Bernie. So this is what we're seeing. It's not new. I don't think it's going to work, and I think ultimately the Democratic Party is going to have to make some very hard choices.
So here's my final question to the both of you on this, and I think that this is an important question that needs to be flushed out. Let's assume that Bernie Sanders wins not only the Democratic nomination but becomes president. How does President Sanders operate in a policy environment that is controlled by the military-industrial complex? I found it very interesting to hear Bernie say on the point of Israel, as a child, I lived in Israel. I truly understand the politics of Israel. Israel has a right to exist, but the Palestinians have the same right. And oh, by the way, Netanyahu is a racist. Now, when I hear Bernie Sanders say that at a national debate, that Netanyahu is a racist, oh my goodness, man, dude, you're out here swinging for the fences. And so there's a perception that we had of Barack Obama, that Barack Obama was a liberal. That was a perception. And he then later came and told us, I don't know why you ever thought that. I never told you I was a liberal.
Right.
So all of that to kind of lay the preface, Caleb, how does President Sanders operate within the space of American foreign policy, understanding what those objectives are, and understanding that that's controlled by Lockheed Martin, that's controlled by Raytheon Corporation and the military-industrial complex?
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. Because I think in addition to the military-industrial complex, we also have the intelligence apparatus and big oil. And that tends to be the divide in American politics. The Republicans tend to be with the manufacturers and the military-industrial complex. The Democrats tend to be with the four super major oil companies and with the intelligence agencies. And that seems to be a divide. And I think that the reason Sanders is having so much difficulty, despite being, so popular among the Democratic Party base, is that foreign policy apparatus within the Democratic Party. We're talking about the Ford Foundation. We're talking about the Rockefeller think tanks like the Asia Society, like the Council on Foreign Relations. They don't trust Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders has tried to distance himself. He called Hugo Chavez, who he praised many times. He said, well, that was just a dead communist dictator. And he's tried to distance himself from his youth and from his politics in the 1980s. But there's still an understanding among the foreign policy section of the Democratic Party that this is a guy who took office in a coalition of radicals. This is a guy who spoke very highly of Marxists and socialist revolutionaries in Latin America, and that he's having to deal with that section of the Democratic Party. And let me add one thing, that Donald Trump and the Republicans have one thing going for them that they've always had in U.S. politics, which is that entrepreneurial American spirit, right? Americans want to go out and build something. We've all got this idea that in America, anybody can be rich if they just try hard enough. And this entrepreneurial, go out and build, which also tends to tie into settler racism and greed and individualism and radical individualism. That kind of American spirit, if you want to call it that, has always kind of played into the favor of Republicans. And it seems like in some ways the Democratic Party has kind of embraced a pessimism, this feeling that, climate change, we have too much stuff. There's, pollution is the problem. We remember Jimmy Carter during the economic downturn basically nullified his chances of being reelected by telling Americans they shouldn't be so concerned about what they own at a time they were all losing their jobs. And that it seems like the Democratic Party's weakness has been that it kind of pushes back and shrugs off that American entrepreneurialism, that desire to go out and build. But you have to wonder if Sanders was able to tap in to that American entrepreneurialism, but channel it in a progressive direction. Say, we are going to build high-speed railway across the Midwest. say we are going to completely revamp this country. We're going to build new water purification systems. We're going to update all the computers. We're going to have fancy new schools. If he was able to tie his democratic socialism in with an entrepreneurial, go out and build an optimistic vision, rather than this kind of pessimistic, anti-materialism that we hear from Democratic Party voices mainly. If he could do that, he could be very, very strong. Let's remember Trump's slogan was "Make America Great Again," right? And it was this kind of like, I'm doing a project to build a better country. And, on the Democratic Party side, you often get this kind of pessimistic, building is not so good, people have too much, and that just doesn't fly in middle America. I'm sorry. And Sanders, there's a psychological question here. There's a question of what you're tapping into in the minds of the public.
Great analysis.